Parliamentarians who sexually harass staff could have their pay withheld and be suspended from Parliament after a landmark report revealing shocking accounts of sexual harassment and bullying inside Parliament. The review by the Sex Discrimination Commission calls for sweeping action, including a new code of conduct for MPs and a crackdown on alcohol. But the government has not yet agreed to implement any of the recommendations. And here is the crux of the problem. These are the statistics. 63% of female members of Parliament experience sexual harassment, an even higher figure than for political staffers. 51% experience at least one incident of bullying, sexual harassment or attempted sexual assault. Joining me live now is the Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins. Thanks so much for your time. How do these statistics compare to the real world, if you like?
Yes, well, we don't have a direct comparison, but we know on sexual harassment, our national figure on that is 1 in 3 Australian workers had experienced sexual harassment in the last 5 years. So it seemed comparable, possibly more because of the way the research was done. But in terms of that number of the 1 in 2 workers had experienced bullying, sexual harassment and sexual assault, that is extremely worrying. And the other statistic that I think is also worrying is just the very low rate of reporting. So only 11% of people who'd experienced sexual harassment reported it. And we heard really there's lots of reasons why that's the case. People are fearful for their job, but they're also fearful of the political implications, the media reputational reporting, that they might actually affect the chances of their party getting into government. So there's a lot of extra reasons why people might not report.
Statistics are one thing and they can be dehumanising in some ways, but your report had anecdotes all throughout. One that stuck out was this. The MP sitting beside me leaned over, thinking he wanted to tell me something. I leaned in. He grabbed me and stuck his tongue down my throat. The others all laughed. It was revolting and humiliating. Is that emblematic of the things that you heard?
Yes, and look, 1,700 people participated in the review, so we did get such a strong evidence base of the experience. Those quotes that are throughout the report give voice to those experiences, and we definitely heard very concerning experiences. We heard positive experiences as well, but often people would say they felt lucky they were in an office with a parliamentarian who was really respectful and that they could see others had a much harder time. So we definitely heard that. Across the board, we heard of how people across the board feel like they're privileged and honoured to work in that place, including in the press gallery as well as in Staffer's office and the parliamentary departments. Indeed. And we really heard of a huge appetite for change, so really a recognition that change was needed and people really wanted to contribute to it but knew that alone they couldn't, but as a systemic issue we can make change, and so that's the focus of our recommendations.
We have Brittany Higgins to thank for this report in many ways. Did you find other instances of rape?
We did survey and we found that 1% of workers currently in the Parliament told us that they had been either actually or attempted sexual assault. And in our interviews, we did almost 500 interviews, and in those interviews we definitely heard of those experiences. So you talked about the statistics and you're absolutely right. When you hear about the impact of this high profile and really respected and important workplace, just leaving such trauma and scars behind in the people that really go there to help our community and our country, there's no question that that is absolutely unacceptable and that needs change very soon.
So what happened to Brittany has happened before?
So we didn't, and I can't talk about specific instances, but I can confirm that people have experienced either actual or attempted sexual assault.
Wow. Okay, you've highlighted the worst of the worst in this report, but what about that subtle, pervasive actions and attitudes that mostly women have to deal with every day? In many ways, that's going to be harder to change, isn't it?
I think in some ways that's really easy to change. It's so outrageous. So one of the things that really, we know that this is a problem across Australian workplaces. So that's not to say this isn't a problem here. We know across the board. But it really did strike me, and you've mentioned the statistic, female parliamentarians, it is just so much harder. They deal with sexism and sexual harassment just so frequently, online, in their party rooms, in the chamber, by constituents, and their reputations are very quickly marred in a way that their male colleagues are not. I think that in the community and in our workplaces, there's this view that women are making too much of a fuss. Well, when I spoke to those female parliamentarians, they're not making much of a fuss at all because they know that it's high risk. So I'm prepared to say really loudly that those experiences are unacceptable for our women politicians because, like the men, they're incredibly valuable contributors, and also for the female staff.
Commissioner, if our lawmakers are operating in this culture, what does it say about how that permeates through to their decision making? You know, this culture in Parliament House, these politicians are working in every day, and then they're meant to be making decisions for half the population, which happen to be females. I mean, do they really have their finger on the pulse?
So really a big focus of our recommendations is saying we want this place to attract the best people and that they be able to perform at their best when they get there. So a couple of the main areas of our recommendations are about the institutional and individual leadership. I would say the leaders are very focused on the Australian community. They're not focused on their own staff and how they treat each other internally, or are not focused enough. So that is a strong recommendation. The other strong recommendations is about mechanisms, including targets and reporting, to improve diversity across the parliament. So it's not enough to say anyone can, sort of run. That's just not a practical thing. They need to take some positive steps to make sure this is inclusive and that everyone has the opportunity to put their name forward, because then we'll get the best people that will represent us better.
Well, this report could trigger more people to come forward with their stories. Will there be an opportunity for them?
Yes, the mechanisms we've recommended actually provide a range of options. This was something that was very much missing. To some degree, in the absence of mechanisms, people are going to the media, and the media have been important in spotlighting this issue. But we have, for the Parliament, recommended options, and there's already the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service established for people to raise their concerns. In many cases, we heard people would like to make disclosures but don't want to proceed with a complaint, but they do need supports. So our recommendations provide those avenues. We definitely had, in those 500 interviews, so many people said to me, we are telling you this, but we would never say this. They're so loyal to their parties and their bosses, and that's totally understandable. So I think the review itself was such an important opportunity for people who had stories to tell them, and now for us, in a de-identified way, to share them with the Australian community and with the Parliament, to help them understand just what is the challenge they face, but what is the change that they can achieve.
Kate, we've seen reports not quite like this before. We've seen recommendations made. We've seen governments of all stripes say, I will look at them, I will consult, and then it goes to the bottom drawer. These recommendations, all 28 of them, need to be implemented, don't they? And what's the time frame?
So we were really practical in this. So we got the evidence, we came up with the recommendations that would work, and then we've included in our report a 2-year implementation plan with some urgent things to put in place before the next election, because we know no matter the outcome, we'll get a whole new range of people will come into the Parliament. So in terms of the response, I feel really optimistic that we will get a response from the whole Parliament. So it's a multi-party and cross-bench sort of commitment that is needed to these changes. And I just think that the demands in 2021 from our community, not just in this space, but in looking at consent education of young people and a whole range of other issues, including the vocal words of Grace Tame, have really created a community momentum to look to our Parliament, ask them to set the standard and expect the change to happen. And 2 years isn't that long a time in how change happens. I'm really confident we can get a really significant change and improvement, and I'm confident that the people there want it just as much as the Australian community.
I'm not sure I share your confidence just yet, Kate, but I'm on board. Thanks so much for your time. We'll speak soon.
Thank you, Laura.